Hello everyone. In this video I want to talk about weapon swapping. Many players come to me for advice on how to properly do their rotations. Let's imagine the following scenario. Someone is trying to pick up Power Soul Beast and they go to the golem, and let's just assume that they knew how to set up the boons on themselves and the conditions on the golem. They are going to use buff food, which we're going to do as well. They spawn a golem and they try to practice their rotation. Let's get some hits in. And it might look something like this. Where they reach the 80% mark and have about 36k DPS. And then they come to me and they will send me a log maybe, and they will ask, what am I doing wrong? Why am I not getting higher numbers than that? Because the benchmark at that point is not 36k, but it's 46k, so 10k DPS difference in the burst. And one thing this comes down to is weapon swapping. Now, the way weapon swapping is perhaps imagined by many players, and certainly by ArenaNet, is that as a concept it is supposed to offer you flexibility in your gameplay. Because you can have a weapon set where you are predominantly ranged with a longbow, for example, and you have a weapon set with some axes which are also ranged on the main hand, but on the offhand it's a melee weapon. So maybe this is more of a melee set, so you can hit your offhand skills. But this is supposed to give you some sort of flexibility, right? Whatever the situation is, you can just go at a distance, knock back the enemy and stealth yourself and do ranged combat. And then once you're done with it, you can go with the axe set and maybe hit an axe 5 in your face. So that's the idea of offering you flexibility. It turns out that it is not at all what is happening in practice. Because in practice, weapon swaps are punishing. Let's imagine I use some skills here and now I weapon swap. This weapon swap goes on a 10-second cooldown. This means for the next 10 seconds I cannot use my axe skills. Did you notice that my axe 5 was ready when I weapon swapped? And now I weapon swap to the axe set without using my longbow 2 or my longbow 5. You see that? So by weapon swapping, if you weapon swap basically while skills are still up, you are missing out on them for 10 seconds. And this is how players lose a lot of DPS when they are new to the game. Because they see weapon swaps not as something that is a very important and rigid part of your rotation, which you need to do at the exact right time. No, they see weapon swap maybe as I spend some time on longbow and then I spend some time on axe, but now I remember to swap to axe maybe and use my axe skills. That might work well even. And after some time on axe I get bored and now I swap back. But did you see with that swap I forgot to press axe 4. Now axe 4 is ready all this time and I could have just waited another second for the axe 4. And this is effectively minus the damage of one axe 4. And this is how players can really lose a lot of damage. And what you need to do when you weapon swap is you need to consider the following. You are going to spend the next 10 seconds on the other weapon set. For that reason you need to compare what damage am I going to do by staying versus the damage that I'm going to get by weapon swapping. You know, one of these weapon sets is stronger than the other, always, But there's still situations where a weapon swap is profitable. For example, the longbow set here. Now this does a lot of damage. I can press this really strong skill, and this one is a good knockback to trigger a trait, and this is another good damage skill. So I can press those skills, and this is a lot of damage to the weapon set. But as soon as I've pressed it, this weapon set now offers nothing but auto attacks. So at that moment the weapon set is worthless and I'm supposed to swap. But now that I've waited so long, these skills are ready again, now this weapon set is valuable again. So the value of the weapon set actually changes. And now would be a good time to swap, but the longer I keep talking and waiting, the worse the weapon swap becomes, because this would have value again, this weapon set. So it's not actually like freedom when I'm supposed to swap. No, I need to swap when I put these skills on cooldown, then swapping is good. And now I can put these on cooldown. And I swap back once I've put everything on cooldown. Now is a good time to swap. Now everything was on cooldown for a lot of time still. So I maximized my opportunity cost of the weapons. I minimized the opportunity cost basically, and in order to maximize the damage I do basically. So this concept of swapping away from weapon sets is quite an important one to grasp. So to summarize it maybe in one simple rule is, when you have everything on cooldown, then is a good moment to weapon swap. But if big skills are coming back up soon, it is probably better to still wait. However, these considerations can be very complicated to make, and I think none of us can actually, like, in their head predict the damage a weapon set is going to do over the next 10 or 15 seconds, depending flexibly on the cooldowns that are available or so on. So this is unfeasible to do while in combat. Most people can't do it with a calculator. What we do instead is we learn a rotation. And in the rotation, these weapon swaps are given as fixed points where you need to swap. But these weapon swaps then become punishing. Let me explain. I will once do the opening burst quite correctly, I hope. So you can see something. Now our goal is to put our Axe 2 to maximum use. And I can show you how it's done correctly by pressing it as the first skill that you press on the Axe set. So we press it first, remember? So I do the opening. And now I press it again. That was the second skill. And now the third use. Now I use the Axe 4. And now this is a beautiful weapon swap. Okay? 43.4k DPS for the first number. This is a beautiful weapon swap I was able to do there. This was optimal in the sense that everything was on cooldown, and it was a good swap. So we used Axe 2 4 times. But if I forget to press the Axe 2 at the start, let's see what happens. If I mess up the skill order, let's see what happens to the cooldowns. Let's say I go these skills first, and only now I press this one. I have 2 uses now, 3 uses. Now I could swap now, but now this one comes back up, and I could wait, but now these come up, and now I'm out of the rotation, right? Like, this is what could happen to a newbie. They press one skill in the wrong order, and then the cooldowns don't line up anymore the way they are supposed to line up, and they half follow the rest of the rotation then, but this snowballs the damage loss. And this is a problem that many players have who view rotations more as priority lists or guidelines. When a weapon swap is a part of the rotation, then it's nothing like a guideline or nothing like a option of offering flexibility. No, these weapon swaps are a lockout of parts of your skill set. And for Soul Beast, for example, it isn't too bad to get locked to the axe set because the axe set is very powerful. They have buffed these skills, so they do a lot of damage now and you have a lot of sustained damage. So there's just camping on the axe set will be fine. However, swapping to the longbow set is a huge lockout out of these great skills. So you need to make sure that the longbow set is really working well for you to make it worth it. And that's what players struggle with. So what I suggest to players who struggle with weapon swaps, an easy way to buff up their damage, and if I remove the chat cover for a second. Okay. A really easy possibility to buff up their damage is to just pretend that the quote-unquote weaker weapon set just doesn't exist. So they never weapon swap. Let's see what happens. Like I press these buttons. Okay, I shouldn't have pressed my signet. But now, by just not swapping, yeah, let's maybe ignore that I lost my ferocity buff. Anyway. By just not swapping, I'm avoiding the potential pitfall of locking myself out of these great skills and maybe getting stuck longbow auto-attacking. And I get quite respectable, whatever that means, damage out of this, right? I have like a 32k opener, and I'm basically pressing just buttons as I come up. So I get players who write me that they have trouble reaching 33k on their Power Soul Beast, and I can reach it just with one of the weapon sets. So perhaps this is a good simplification to make for the build, that you just don't weapon swap at all, because, like, as I said, you prevent this most egregious error that you get stuck on something that is bad. And I'm not completely satisfied with this. Like, of course, now I've made my way, like, the benchmark is 38k, I made my way to 33k with that, so it's really good, like, I'm a super good trader now. But to me, this gameplay is very limited, what it can do, right? Even if I was the best player in the world at camping this weapon set, I would hit a brick wall at some point where my damage can't get better anymore, because, like, it's all my weapon set allows in terms of mastery as well. Like, I could make sure to loop better so my Sikkim hits my big damage skills more. But other than that, like, this is not that satisfying for me, and it limits myself as a player as well. So what I suggest is, when I suggest this, I suggest it just to get a feeling of the importance of these buttons. Like, to realize that there is a very high floor just by pressing your good buttons, and to show that doing good damage is not like prohibitive, hidden behind high actions per minute or something. No, it's something that is very accessible if you just know which buttons to press. But if someone wants to learn Power Soul Beast, that would not be the complete picture for me. For me, this would not be satisfying. So what it then comes to is understanding weapon swapping, understanding why there is a longbow set here, understanding when to swap to the longbow set and when not to swap. And the easiest way to do it is obviously to just copy the weapon swaps, but in the end what I recommend is that you also take a look at the benchmark, and whenever he weapon swaps, you look at the cooldowns of the skills, and I guarantee you will always see weapon swaps when these big skills are all on cooldown. There's not a situation where the benchmark person will say, oh, my X4 is ready, but I want to longbow auto attack. That's not going to happen. They explicitly put these skills on cooldown and then weapon swap. And Soul Beast is of course an example of classes with maybe a bit punishing weapon swap, like if you get stuck on longbow 1, you're doing bad damage. But there are classes that have it even worse than Soul Beast. Firebrand is one of those. Firebrand has a weapon set called Scepter, and on the Scepter, I can actually try to show it. On the Scepter, the auto attack is very bad. So when you do a rotation, it revolves around using this skill because this is quite good, but avoiding auto attacks. So we want to avoid a situation where we are locked to Scepter and maybe we can't weapon swap. And we need to Scepter auto attack, because these Scepter auto attacks will drop our damage harsh, in a very harsh way. So the point of the rotation basically is to put X2 on cooldown, maybe also put X3 on cooldown if you can. Then go to Scepter, and now don't auto attack, you go into the Tome, press your Tome skills here, and you do everything you can to not have to auto attack. Now this was a very slow and bad showcase, we still auto attacked a bunch, but that's generally the idea. We swap to Scepter in situations where we have utility skills and your Tome to fill the time. So we are not actually forced to use this terrible attack, which is it applies conditions through some traits, but other than that, it's just bad. And the problem with the Scepter as a weapon set is that even if you play it perfectly, that's only a few thousand DPS you're gaining extra from weapon swapping. So the margin of what you can do wrong here the margin is very small, and the chance that you mess up can be quite big, because new players might, let's say you've used your Tome, and now new players see the Scepter weapon coming up and they might be interested in pressing it. But this is a huge mistake for your damage, because you have Symbol of Punishment, but you're locked to the Scepter for 10 seconds. What are you going to do other than that? And so what many Firebrands, even those with 2,000 hours of experience playing Firebrand, what many of these Firebrands do is they just camp on the axe set. And again, when players say that they struggle with playing Firebrand, and maybe they say, oh, I don't reach high enough damage values, they are then surprised to learn how good just camping one weapon set can be. Because this axe set is really good, and the Scepter set is just a minor gain. So I think Firebrand is even a more extreme version of what we already saw at Soul Beast. And what is really important for a firebrand if you want to weapon swap is that you understand when to do it and why to do it. But I also think it is worth learning how to weapon swap, because weapon swapping, I think it's one of the things of Guild Wars 2 that is really cool, that it adds a layer of skill, of possible skill expression in the game. Like, I wouldn't want ArenaNet to just remove weapon swapping in combat. I want them to I want this to be an option to weapon swap to gain 1000 extra damage. And even though some players may laugh at the proposition of like caring about rotations and caring about doing a bit more damage, I think it's pretty cool that if you are dedicated and spend 3000 hours practicing Firebrand, you can maybe even learn how to weapon swap and get more damage out of it. But we need to recognize weapon swapping as well as a kind of a newbie trap where they are, for a moment at least, losing damage or not making significant gains when they weapon swap. So it's these two things at the same time. So it's a good way to express skill, but it's also a good way to completely ruin your damage output if you do it wrong. And I would encourage everyone who watches my videos, who wants to learn how to become a better player, to really try to understand the weapon swaps, try to understand that it's about putting skills on cooldown. On some sets it's about avoiding having to auto-attack, and really see weapon swaps not as an expression of flexibility, but as a rigid part of a rotation to greed for maximum damage output. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching my commentary about weapon swapping, and I wish you a wonderful day.